We were just practicing his wedding dance, until He pulled me close. I never thought practicing a wedding dance would hurt this much. When my best friend, Evan, asked me to help him get ready for his big day, I said yes before my brain could catch up to my heart. He needed someone to rehearse with, someone who could spin him around the living room until the steps felt natural. And who better than me, the guy who's been by his side since we were 12. The problem was, Evan wasn't just my best friend. He was the boy I'd loved in secret for years. I'd buried those feelings under layers of jokes, loyalty, and late-night talks. I'd convinced myself I could be happy just standing next to him, even if it meant standing in the shadow of someone else's love. But that was before he asked me to practice his first dance as a married man. Before he put his hand on my shoulder. Before he looked at me like I was the only one in the room. Before I realized just how much it would hurt to let him go. The living room was cluttered the way it always was when we hung out. Pizza boxes on the coffee table, a half-empty bottle of soda sweating rings into the wood, and his dog sprawled across the couch cushions like he owned the place. Evan stood across from me, barefoot in worn sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, holding out his hand like he was actually inviting me to the dance floor. "Okay, so the DJ says it's a slow one," he explained, his grin easy, casual, the kind of grin that always knocked the air out of my chest. "You've got to help me nail this. I don't want to trip over her dress and faceplant in front of everyone." His fiancée. The woman who'd said yes to the proposal I'd only dreamed of. I swallowed hard and forced myself to smile back. "Don't worry, man. I got you. Nobody trips on my watch." I slipped my hand into his, and it felt like touching fire. We moved awkwardly at first, counting out the rhythm in our heads, shuffling across the hardwood floor with stiff shoulders and too much laughter. He stepped on my toes. I bumped his knee. The dog barked at us like we were intruders in our own friendship. And still, I couldn't stop noticing how his palm pressed into mine, warm and steady, or how his other hand found its way to my waist without hesitation. It was nothing to him, just practice, just a rehearsal. But to me it was everything. As the minutes slipped by, our movements grew smoother. I guided him through the turns, reminded him to relax his shoulders, teased him when he got too stiff. And then, without warning, the air shifted. The laughter faded. The world outside the four walls seemed to disappear. He pulled me closer. I don't know if he realized how little space was left between us. My chest brushed his with every step, my breath mingling with his as we swayed. His grip on my waist tightened, and his eyes, God, his eyes, locked on mine like he was searching for something I'd never let myself give. The music playing from his phone was faint, barely audible over the thundering of my own heartbeat. Yet in that moment, it felt like the only soundtrack we'd ever need. I wanted to freeze time, to stay right there, in that fragile space where it almost felt like we were more than what we were. But I couldn't, because reality always comes crashing back. "You're a good partner," he said finally, his voice low, like he was afraid of breaking the spell. I forced a laugh. "Don't let your bride hear you say that. She might get jealous." The joke landed, but not in the way I wanted. His smile faltered, his gaze dropped, and for a second, I swore I saw something flicker in his eyes, hesitation, maybe even regret. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the same easy grin I knew so well. "You're right," he said, stepping back and clapping me on the shoulder like we were just two friends messing around. "Thanks, man. You're saving my ass here." The distance between us felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Later that night, after he'd gone to bed and I was left staring at the ceiling of his guest room, the weight of it all pressed down on me. We'd always been close, too close, some people said. We'd shared secrets, fears, and even the silence that most friendships never survive. But dancing with him like that, it was different. It stripped away the safety net I'd built around my feelings. For the first time, I wondered if maybe he felt it too. Maybe the reason he pulled me close wasn't just nerves or habit. Maybe he held me like that because a part of him wanted to. Or maybe I was just reading too much into it like I always did. Because at the end of the day, no matter what passed between us, he was marrying someone else. And I was just the guy making sure he didn't trip on his way to forever. The morning came too quickly. I found him in the kitchen, hair a mess, mug of coffee in hand, humming the same song we'd danced to the night before. He looked at me, grinned like nothing had changed, and asked if I wanted pancakes. And just like that, I was back in my role. Best friend. Wingman. The guy who'd stand next to him at the altar but never in the spotlight of his love. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of how tightly he'd held me. Or the way, just for a heartbeat, it felt like I was the one he was supposed to be dancing with. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. That the way he'd pulled me close was just muscle memory. Some instinct from 1,000 hugs, 1,000 moments of comfort we'd shared over the years. He'd been there when my first relationship fell apart, when I lost my dad, when I had no one else to call at 3 in the morning. Evan had always been the one to hold me together when I was breaking. So why did this feel different? Why did I wake up with his touch still burning into my skin? The days slipped by, and the wedding crept closer. Invitations had been sent, venues booked, family members flying in. The air around him buzzed with nervous energy, but he wore it well. He was always good at that, masking his stress with charm, laughing when everyone else was on edge. I watched him smile through endless to-do lists, watched him practice his vows under his breath, watched him tuck his phone against his ear as he whispered, "I love you," to the woman waiting on the other end. And each time, my chest tightened a little more, because the truth was, I wasn't just jealous of her. I was jealous of the version of him she got to keep. The version that said good morning through sleepy yawns. The version that reached for her hand under the table. The version that wasn't afraid to say the words I'd never had the courage to whisper aloud. We kept practicing the dance. It became our nightly ritual. After the chaos of planning, after the phone calls and meetings and decisions, he'd put on that same song, push the coffee table aside, and hold out his hand to me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Come on," he'd say. "One more round, just to make sure I don't embarrass myself." And I'd go, every time, because how could I say no to him? At first, it was clumsy, filled with laughter and exaggerated twirls meant to hide how close we really were. But night after night, the space between us seemed to shrink. His hand lingered longer at my waist. His eyes searched mine like he was trying to read words I hadn't spoken. There was one night, God, I'll never forget it, when the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, the music cut off mid-verse, and the only light came from the glow of the street lamp outside. But instead of stopping, he kept going. He hummed the tune under his breath, low and off-key, and guided me across the room with nothing but the sound of his voice. I could have lived in that moment forever. The hum of his chest against mine, the weight of his hand steady at the small of my back, the unspoken words hanging in the silence. If the world had ended right then, I think I would have been okay. But the world didn't end. The lights flickered back on. The music returned. And with it, the reminder that this wasn't real. We weren't lovers dancing in the dark. We weren't soulmates finding each other in the quiet. We were just two friends rehearsing for a wedding that wasn't mine. It got harder to hide what I was feeling. One evening, when he stumbled through a step and ended up practically crashing into me, I froze. My hands stayed on his chest longer than they should have. My breath caught when he laughed, his face inches from mine. And for one terrifying, electrifying second, I thought he was going to kiss me. But he didn't. He pulled back with that same easy smile, scratching the back of his neck like nothing had happened. "You're a lifesaver, man," he said. "Seriously, I don't know what I'd do without you." I smiled, but my heart broke a little, because I knew exactly what I'd do without him. Fall apart. A week before the wedding, I finally cracked. We were sitting on his porch, beers in hand, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The air was warm, the cicadas loud, and the weight of everything unsaid pressed against my ribs until I couldn't breathe. "Evan?" I started, my voice barely more than a whisper. He turned, eyebrows raised, completely unaware of the war raging inside me. My throat closed up, the words tangled themselves into knots. "I'm really glad I'm here for you. For all of this." His smile softened, something warm and unguarded flickering in his eyes. Of course you are. You've always been here. He leaned back in his chair, tilting his head toward the sky like it was the easiest truth in the world. But to me it felt like a knife, because always being here meant never being what I wanted to be. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, replaying every look, every touch, every almost that had slipped through our fingers. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe I couldn't do this. If maybe standing beside him at the altar, watching him promise forever to someone else, would be the thing that finally broke me. But then I remembered the way he'd looked at me in the living room, the way his voice had carried the melody in the dark, the way he'd held me like I was more than practice. And I knew, no matter how much it hurt, I would still stand by his side, because that's what love is, isn't it? Not always getting the person you want, but being there for them even when it tears you apart. The rehearsal dinner was the first time it truly sank in. Evan's family filled the restaurant with laughter, clinking glasses and retelling old stories that made his fiancée blush. She looked beautiful that night, glowing with the kind of happiness I'd only ever seen in movies. She fit in seamlessly, like she had always been meant to sit beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her smile turning toward him every time someone made a toast. And me? I was the best friend, the one everyone already knew, the one who'd been by his side since childhood. I was the guy they all patted on the back and thanked for looking out for him all these years. The one who got roped into speeches about loyalty and friendship, as though that was the whole of my existence. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know how every laugh I forced, every toast I raised, was another crack in the dam I'd built around my heart. Later that night, after the chaos had died down and the families had gone their separate ways, Evan found me outside, leaning against the hood of my car. "Hey!" he said softly, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You disappeared." I shrugged. Needed some air. He studied me for a moment, his eyes narrowing like he could see right through me. That was the problem with Evan, he always could. "You okay?" he asked. The truth lodged in my throat. "No, I'm not okay. I'm breaking apart inside because tomorrow you're going to dance with her the way you've been practicing with me. And I don't know how to survive watching it." But all I said was, "Yeah, just tired." He didn't look convinced, but he let it go. Instead, he leaned against the car beside me, shoulder brushing mine, the two of us staring out at the quiet street like we always did when words weren't enough. "You've been amazing through all this," he murmured. "I don't know how I'd be getting through it without you." I swallowed hard. "That's what I'm here for, right?" His head tilted toward me just slightly. "Yeah," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "But still, you mean more to me than you realize." And just like that, the dam cracked again. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed his words, his tone, the way his shoulder had pressed into mine like he needed me closer. I wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was more than friendship. If maybe he was wrestling with feelings he couldn't name just like I was. But hope is a dangerous thing. It makes you see stars where there's only darkness. The wedding day arrived too soon. The venue was beautiful, the kind of place you only saw in magazines. White roses lined the aisle, fairy lights strung across the beams, music floating gently through the air. Everyone buzzed with excitement, rushing around with final touches. But all I could think about was how desperately I wanted to freeze time before the ceremony began. Evan found me in the dressing room, adjusting his tie in the mirror. He looked unreal in his suit, handsome, sharp, but still undeniably him. He caught my eye in the reflection and grinned nervously. "How do I look? Like someone's about to marry the love of their life?" I said, forcing the words past the lump in my throat. He turned, studying me for a beat longer than felt normal. Then, almost shyly, he said, "I practiced the dance last night, alone. It felt different without you there." The air between us shifted. My heart pounded so hard I thought he could hear it. But before I could respond, someone burst in, announcing it was time. Just like that, the moment was gone. I stood by his side as the ceremony began. I watched him as she walked down the aisle, watched his face light up in ways I'd only ever dreamed of, watched his hands tremble as he took hers. Every vow was a knife. Every promise was another reminder that I would never be the one he chose. And yet I couldn't look away, because I loved him. And love doesn't let you turn away, even when it hurts. The reception was a blur of clinking glasses and laughter, of cameras flashing and guests spilling onto the dance floor. I drifted through it like a ghost, congratulating, smiling, drinking just enough to dull the ache but not enough to make it disappear. Then the music shifted. The DJ's voice boomed, "Ladies and gentlemen, the couple's first dance." My stomach dropped. They moved to the center of the floor, hand in hand, the spotlight soft against their faces. The opening notes of that song filled the air, the same one we'd practiced over and over in his living room. I stood frozen, every muscle locked as I watched him place his hand at her waist, just like he had with me. Watched him spin her, guide her, hold her close. Watched the dance we had built together become theirs. And it broke me, because I could see it. Every correction I'd given him, every step I'd walked him through, every detail we'd perfected together. It was all there, but it wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. The crowd cheered, the cameras flashed, and I clapped along with everyone else, my smile a mask that barely held together. After the dance, I slipped outside, needing air before the walls closed in on me. The night was cool, the music muffled behind the doors, and for the first time all evening, I let myself crumble. I leaned against the railing, head bowed, breaths shaky. My chest ached like I'd run miles, like I'd been holding my heart too tightly for too long. That's when I heard footsteps. "Hey!" Evan's voice said quietly. I froze, wiping my face quickly before turning. He stood in the doorway, jacket off, tie loosened, eyes locked on me. "You left," he said. "Yeah," I muttered. "Needed some air." He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Funny. That's what you said the other night." I didn't answer, couldn't. He moved closer still, until he was standing right in front of me. "Why do I get the feeling you're not telling me something?" And in that moment, under the weight of his gaze, with the sound of our song drifting faintly from the hall behind us, I realized I couldn't keep it in any longer. I had to tell him, even if it ruined everything. My chest felt like it was caving in. All the words I had swallowed for years fought to break free. The truth pressed against my ribs, sharp and relentless, begging to be spoken. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, in the quiet of my room, in the pauses between our conversations, in the spaces where his laughter lingered long after he was gone. But imagining it and living it were two different things. My voice cracked, trembling like a wire pulled too tight. "I can't do this anymore, Evan." His brow furrowed. "Do what?" "Pretend." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever known. The muffled hum of the reception hall seemed impossibly far away, like we were standing in a world carved out just for us. His eyes searched mine, and I could see it. The questions, the confusion, the flicker of something he hadn't dared name. "Pretend what?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. I inhaled sharply, steadying myself against the railing. "Pretend I'm okay watching you marry someone else. Pretend I'm happy when I'm dying inside." His mouth parted, but no words came. "I love you," I blurted out, the confession ripping from me like it had been waiting years to escape. "I've loved you for so long, Evan. And I tried to bury it. To be your friend, your support, the guy you could always count on. But dancing with you, practicing with you, it broke me. Because for a second it felt like maybe it was real. And I can't." My voice shook. "I can't keep pretending anymore." The words hung between us, raw and exposed, like an open wound. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me. The silence stretched, unbearable, and I braced myself for the rejection, for the polite but firm reminder that he was married now, that he loved her, that what I felt could never be returned. But instead, he stepped closer. "Why didn't you tell me before?" His voice was hoarse, like the words hurt to say. "Because you were happy," I whispered. "Because I thought it was better if you never knew. Because losing you completely scared me more than anything." His hands twitched at his sides, like he wanted to reach for me but didn't know if he could. "Do you have any idea?" he murmured, eyes locked on mine. "How many times I've wondered what this was between us? How many times I almost asked you the same thing?" The breath caught in my throat. "You what?" He exhaled shakily, dragging a hand through his hair. I thought it was just me reading too much into things. The way I felt when we were close, when you looked at me like I was more than just your friend. I told myself I was imagining it, that it couldn't be real. And then, she came along. And she was good, and kind, and she loved me without hesitation. And I thought maybe that was enough. My pulse roared in my ears. "And is it?" His gaze faltered, dropping to the ground. "It should be." The weight of those 3 words shattered me. It should be. But it wasn't. He didn't have to say it out loud. The truth was there in the hesitation, in the way his hands trembled, in the way his eyes kept pulling back to mine like gravity. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my throat raw. "I shouldn't have said anything." He looked up sharply. "No, don't do that. Don't take it back. Not when it's the only honest thing between us right now." Tears blurred my vision. "Then what do we do, Evan? You're married now. You've promised her forever." His face twisted, caught between pain and longing. "I don't know." We stood there, 2 men caught in the wreckage of unspoken love, the night pressing in around us. Finally, he stepped closer, his hand lifting like it was moving on instinct. His fingertips brushed against mine, tentative but electric, and it was enough to make my breath hitch. "One last time," he said softly, almost pleading. "Dance with me." My heart stopped. "Evan, please." The music from the reception drifted through the doors, muffled but steady. Slowly, hesitantly, I placed my hand in his. He pulled me into the open space by the railing, the fairy lights above casting a soft glow around us. And just like in his living room, just like in the dark the night the power went out, he held me close. His hand found my waist. My chest pressed against his. Our breaths mingled, ragged and uneven, as we moved slowly, swaying to the rhythm only we could hear. It wasn't practice anymore. It wasn't preparation for someone else. It was us. For the first time, it was us. I wanted to memorize everything. The warmth of his hand, the steady beat of his heart under my palm, the way his forehead almost touched mine as we moved. "I don't know what this means," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know what happens tomorrow or next week or next year. But right now, this feels real." Tears slipped down my cheeks, and I didn't bother to hide them. "It is real." We swayed like that for what felt like forever, suspended in a moment that didn't belong to anyone else. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe. But moments don't last forever. The sound of laughter spilled from the hall as someone opened the doors, calling Evan's name. The spell shattered. We pulled apart, our hands lingering a second too long before falling away. He looked at me, eyes wide, chest heaving, and I knew. We had crossed a line we could never uncross. "I have to go," he whispered. And then he did, leaving me on the balcony, the echo of our dance still trembling in my chest, wondering if love was always destined to come too late. The days after the wedding were a blur. I went home, back to my quiet apartment, back to the routines that had once kept me sane. But nothing felt the same. The walls seemed emptier, the silence heavier. Every song on the radio reminded me of the one we had danced to. Every reflection in the window threatened to show me his face instead of mine. I thought distance would help, that if I put miles between us, maybe the ache would fade. But love doesn't obey logic. Love follows you into your sleep, into your coffee, into the spaces you try to leave untouched. And Evan, he called. He texted. Little things like he always had. "How are you holding up? Did you see the game? Remember that dumb joke from high school?" His voice on the line was the same as it had always been, warm, familiar, steady. But underneath it, I could hear it. The same hesitation I carried. The weight of the balcony still between us. One night, about a week after the wedding, he called late. I almost didn't answer. My heart couldn't take another round of pretending. But something in me couldn't ignore him either. So I picked up. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet, almost guilty. "Hey." There was a long pause, the kind that stretches out until it feels unbearable. "I can't stop thinking about it," he admitted finally. "That night. What you said. What we did." My throat tightened. "Neither can I." Another silence. Then, almost brokenly, he whispered, "What do we do now?" I closed my eyes, gripping the phone like it was the only thing keeping me tethered. "I don't know, Evan. You're married. That's a line we can't just erase." He exhaled shakily. "I know. But I also know I've never felt more myself than when I was with you." The confession cut through me like glass. Because it was everything I wanted and everything I couldn't have. After that, we didn't talk for a while. I think we both knew we needed space. He needed to figure out who he was in his marriage. And I needed to figure out if I could survive letting him go. Weeks turned into months. The texts came less often. The calls slowed. And little by little, I convinced myself it was better this way. That maybe the kindest thing I could do for him, and for myself, was to step back. But healing doesn't happen in a straight line. Some nights, the loneliness hit like a tidal wave. I'd find myself scrolling through old photos, replaying old voicemails, clinging to the sound of his laughter like it was oxygen. Other nights, I felt almost free, like maybe I could finally move forward, find someone who didn't need to hide, someone who could give me all of themselves without hesitation. But even then, in the quiet, my heart always circled back to him. It was almost 6 months later when I saw him again. I hadn't expected it. I was grabbing coffee on a rainy afternoon, head down, trying to shake off the grayness of the day. And then I heard it, his voice, behind me in line, laughing at something the barista said. I froze. When I turned, there he was. Same easy grin, same spark in his eyes, though a little wearier than I remembered. He saw me instantly, his smile faltering, his breath catching like he hadn't expected this either. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey." We stood there in the middle of the cafe. Two people who used to know each other better than anyone. Now strangers with a secret lodged between them. He asked if I wanted to sit. I said yes, even though my chest screamed no. We talked for hours. About everything and nothing, the way work was going, the shows we were watching, the people we'd lost touch with. On the surface, it was casual, easy, the way it had always been. But underneath, there was tension in every glance, every pause, every sip of coffee. Finally, he set his cup down, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything. For not knowing what to do that night. For leaving you standing there. For all of it." I swallowed hard. "You don't owe me an apology. You were honest. You chose your life. That's not something to be sorry for." He shook his head. "But I hurt you." My voice cracked. "Yeah, but I hurt myself too. By holding on to something I knew I might never have." His eyes softened, pained. "Do you ever regret telling me?" I thought about it. About the nights I'd cried myself to sleep. About the ache that never fully went away. About the distance it had put between us. And then I thought about that dance. About finally saying the words I'd carried for years. About the moment he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it, because for once it was real, even if it was just for a moment." He reached across the table then, his fingers brushing mine. Just barely. A touch that said everything words couldn't. "I don't know what the future looks like," he whispered, "but I need you in my life. In some way. I can't lose you completely." Tears burned my eyes, but I smiled through them. "Then we'll figure it out. Whatever it looks like." That's the thing about love. Sometimes it doesn't give you a clean ending. Sometimes it doesn't wrap itself neatly with vows and forever. Sometimes it's messy, complicated, unfinished. But that doesn't mean it isn't worth it. Because even if I never get to call him mine, even if the dance we shared was the only one we'll ever have, I'll carry it with me. Always. The memory of his hand at my waist. The warmth of his chest against mine. The truth of his eyes in the dark. Proof that for one brief, impossible moment we were everything we couldn't be. Seasons changed. The sharp ache dulled into something quieter, a shadow that lingered but didn't consume me. I threw myself into work, into friends, into learning how to be whole without him at the center of my world. Some days I succeeded. Others I failed spectacularly. But little by little, I discovered something I never thought I would. I could survive this. I could survive loving someone I couldn't have. I could survive the silence that followed. I could survive knowing that the life I dreamed of with him wasn't mine to live. And in surviving, I found something close to peace. Evan and I still talked. Not as much, not as easily, but enough. Enough to remind us of who we had been, of the bond we'd built before love complicated everything. Sometimes we'd go weeks without a word, and then suddenly he'd call. His voice filling the silence like sunlight after rain. "How are you?" he'd ask. "I'm okay," I'd reply, and most of the time I meant it. I learned how to let the conversation be enough. How to accept the pieces of him I could still have, without breaking myself on the parts one couldn't. It wasn't easy. It never would be. But it was real. Then one night, months later, I found myself at a wedding again. Not his, someone else's. A cousin of mine marrying the man he loved. I watched them dance under the string lights, hands steady, eyes locked, bodies swaying like nothing else existed. And it hit me. Love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it ends in heartbreak. Sometimes it ends in longing. Sometimes it ends before it ever truly begins. But sometimes it survives, finds a way. I thought about Evan then, about the dance that had changed everything, about the confession that had nearly broken us. And instead of pain, I felt gratitude, because he taught me what love could be, even if it wasn't mine to keep. Weeks later, I ran into him again. Pure chance. A bookstore this time, his hair a little longer, his expression softer. He looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I echoed. We stood there among the shelves, surrounded by stories, our own unfinished one hanging between us. For the first time, I didn't feel the sharp sting of loss. I just felt calm. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm good," I answered honestly. And I was. We walked together for a while after that, talking about little things, the weather, the books we loved, the way life kept moving even when we weren't ready. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't painful. It was us. As we parted ways, he hesitated. "You know," he said, "I still think about that night sometimes. About us. About what could have been." For a long moment, I just looked at him. And then, gently, I smiled. "Me too," I admitted. But maybe it was enough that it happened at all. He nodded, his eyes glistening, and we said goodbye. That was the last time I saw him for a while. And maybe that's how it was meant to be. Because not all stories are meant to end with forever. Some are meant to teach us, to shape us, to show us the depths of what our hearts can feel. Some are meant to leave us with memories that sting and heal all at once. And our story, our dance, was one of those. I still think about it sometimes. About the way his hand fit against mine, the way his chest rose and fell with mine, the way the world disappeared when we moved together. And I realize now it wasn't about losing him. It was about finding myself, finding the strength to love without conditions, finding the courage to speak my truth, even when it scared me, finding the hope that, somewhere, someday, someone will pull me close, not for practice, not for a moment, but for forever. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever loved someone you couldn't have, if you've ever stood on the sidelines of your own heart and watched it beat for someone else, know this. You are not alone. Your love is not wasted. Your love is not too much. Your love is proof that you are alive, that you feel deeply, that you are capable of giving the most beautiful part of yourself to the world. And one day, someone will meet you there. One day, someone will take your hand, hold your gaze, and never let go. Until then, remember the dances. Remember the moments. Remember that love, even when it doesn't last, always leaves you changed. Because we were just practicing his wedding dance. But for one fleeting heartbeat, it felt like we were practicing forever. And that will always be enough.